Mike threw a coin high into the sky. The coin quickly fell straight into the ocean. As it sank deeper and deeper, its speed slowly started to decrease. But during the fall, tiny bubbles suddenly began rising from the sea floor. When the coin finally reached the bottom, a small opening appeared on the ground, and those endless bubbles were coming from that tiny hole. This strange scene shocked Mike, because they were working on an offshore drilling rig in the middle of the ocean. The bubbles meant the pressure under the sea floor was becoming unstable. The massive pressure underground had already cracked the layers of rock. At that moment, the drilling rig was like a shaken bottle of soda. It had already stored a huge amount of high-pressure gas. Once that pressure reached its limit, the entire system could suddenly explode and destroy the whole platform. Realizing they were facing a deadly situation, Mike immediately reported it to his supervisor. But it was already too late. The drilling operator had already noticed something was wrong with the pipes. He walked closer and stared at the cracks on the pipe. His nervous reaction made everyone around him come over. When he touched the pipe, he discovered mud was leaking out from the cracks. At that moment, he realized the situation had become serious. With 10 years of experience, he knew exactly what this meant. It was a warning sign of a blowout. And just as he expected, mud soon started pouring out of the well. Everyone froze when they saw it. They had already guessed what might happen, but seeing it happen right in front of them was still impossible to believe. Inside the control room, the engineers immediately shut down the annular blowout preventer. This temporarily stopped the mud from shooting out. Then they quickly told everyone to move to a safer area, because the blowout preventer could only hold for a short time. The massive pressure below could break through at any moment. The operator asked the engineer what they should do next. The engineer ordered them to open the drilling pipes and release the pressure through another path. The operator didn't waste any time. He moved through the falling mud and reached the pipe. Then he quickly opened the valve. The move temporarily stopped the mud from continuing to spray out. Everyone looked at the destroyed area and thought the crisis was over. The engineer believed he had successfully controlled the situation, but they forgot one thing. Could the blowout preventer really stop that much pressure? Just when everyone thought they had survived the danger, something terrifying was happening deep underwater. The pressure that had built up for so long started rushing back toward the well. The blowout preventer they trusted was instantly overwhelmed. Mud exploded upward through the drilling pipes. Because the diversion valves were open, the mud started spreading through different parts of the platform. They had underestimated the power beneath the ocean. The emergency action they used had now made the disaster spread faster. Soon, mud started bursting from the equipment gaps. By the time workers reacted, they could no longer stop it. The pressure numbers kept rising, reaching an extremely dangerous level. The force was strong enough to crush a truck instantly. Seeing the situation getting worse, the engineer ordered everyone to shut down the second blowout preventer. As the mud flow was temporarily stopped, the workers finally got a moment to breathe. But the danger was far from over. The pressure below the ocean was still building up, and something much worse was coming. The second blowout preventer only lasted a few seconds. The powerful mud blast knocked nearby workers to the ground. The mud itself wasn't deadly, but under extreme pressure, it became like a missile fired from a cannon. The engineer immediately gave a new order. He told them to close the drill pipe valve and redirect the pressure somewhere else. After receiving the order, the operator rushed into action. He became the only person who could stop the disaster. But at that moment, mud was blasting out from the seafloor like a high-pressure water cannon. Even with all his strength, he couldn't control it. The situation had already gone beyond human control. Pieces of rock were thrown into the air, like bullets, and flew toward the control room. The sound of them hitting the glass made everyone inside nervous. They thought the reinforced glass could hold for a while, but they underestimated the power of the disaster. Then they discovered something worse. The mud coming out of the well contained a small amount of natural gas. It seemed harmless at first, but the gas quickly spread everywhere. Because natural gas was highly flammable, it made the already dangerous situation even more deadly. Under normal conditions, the thousands of feet of drilling pipes were always filled with mud. The mud was used to keep the underground oil and gas pressure under control. But once the blowout became uncontrollable, the high-pressure oil and gas below started rushing upward. The underground gas acted like a giant piston, pushing the mud inside the well upward. That was why the first thing to come out of the well was usually mud, mixed with rock pieces and dirty water. After the debris inside the well was pushed out, the oil and gas started escaping freely. They spread across the entire platform, like a wild animal that had broken loose. At that point, even a tiny spark could turn the whole platform into a burning hell. And on an offshore drilling rig, possible ignition sources were everywhere. There was no way to avoid the danger. Then the engine room air system started pulling in large amounts of methane gas. The engines began malfunctioning, and a spark suddenly ignited the oil and gas around the platform. In the next second, a massive explosion happened. The entire drilling rig turned into a fireball within seconds. A nearby ship saw what happened and immediately called for help. After receiving the emergency call, the Coast Guard quickly organized rescue teams. But the rig was almost 30 miles away from shore. Even a helicopter would need a long time to arrive. And right now, time was the one thing they didn't have. After the first explosion, Mike slowly climbed out of the wreckage. He was one of the first people to realize something was wrong. Before the disaster happened, Mike and his mentor had already discovered problems on the rig. They went to the person in charge and asked him to stop the operation. But the project had already started production. Stopping the work would cause massive financial losses. The person in charge didn't want to take that responsibility, so he allowed the drilling to continue. And that decision led to what was happening now. But there was no time to blame anyone. The only thing that mattered was stopping the disaster from getting worse. Mike found his mentor in the middle of the wreckage. They realized the drilling system was still running. They had to cut off the oil pipeline, or the consequences would be even worse. At the same time, a female operator inside the control room realized the same problem. She wanted to shut down the pipeline immediately, but the platform had strict access controls. She didn't have permission to perform that operation. The supervisor next to her stopped her from continuing. Meanwhile, the person in charge was running around the platform, trying to find a solution. By accident, he entered the control room. Soon after, Mike and his mentor Taylor arrived too. Everyone reached the same conclusion. The only way to stop the disaster was to disconnect the oil pipeline. But when Taylor saw the person in charge, he immediately understood. If his warning had been taken seriously earlier, things might have turned out differently. However, there was no time left to argue. They had to act immediately. Taylor prepared to activate the emergency system, cut off the pipeline, and seal the well, hoping to control the fire. But even after shutting down the pipeline, the flames continued burning. The fire was already out of control. They had to evacuate immediately. When they walked outside, they discovered the person in charge had already left on the last rescue boat without waiting for them. Luckily, they quickly found another emergency raft. They couldn't waste even 1 second, because the fire could consume them at any moment. Everyone worked together and lowered the raft. Mike helped injured workers get on board first. After Taylor and the others were safe, he prepared to leave last. But just as he was about to board, another explosion happened. Just as Mike was about to leave, another massive explosion happened nearby. The powerful blast threw him and the female operator to the ground. They were surrounded by flames, and the ocean below them was burning because of the leaking oil. Their escape route was completely blocked. They had only one choice. They had to move to a higher place and find another way out. Mike realized the highest point on the rig was their best chance. They needed enough height to jump as far away as possible, so he led the female operator toward the helipad. At that moment, the drilling rig had become a disaster zone. Even the metal floor beneath their feet was starting to bend from the heat. One wrong step could send them into the fire. Seeing an open area below, Mike didn't hesitate. He helped his teammate put on a life jacket and prepared for the jump. But at the final moment, the female operator froze. She was overwhelmed by what was happening and thought she couldn't make it out alive. Mike refused to leave her behind. He kept encouraging her and told her they still had a chance, but she still couldn't move. As the flames got closer, Mike grabbed her and pulled her toward the edge. Then they jumped into the ocean together. The moment they fell, pieces of the exploding rig started raining down like bullets. Even with the water slowing them down, the high-speed debris was still extremely dangerous. A piece of metal hit Mike directly in the back of his head. The impact nearly knocked him unconscious, but he forced himself to stay awake and fought his way back to the surface. At the same time, nearby ships had already sent rescue teams. Just before Mike lost consciousness, the rescuers found him and pulled him out of the water. The female operator was rescued as well. After Mike escaped from the burning rig, the disaster finally began to come to an end. But the accident cost the lives of 11 workers, 17 people were injured, and 115 people survived.